Hi, I'm Tom Biebighauser with Wetland Restoration and Training. In this video, we're going to look at how you can build a small wetland in your yard using rakes and shovels. These hand tools, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it. And the wetland you build can provide habitat for frogs, toads, salamanders, dragonflies, and even butterflies. Let's get started. Heather Tols built these two beautiful wetlands and a stream in the yard of her home near Kamloops in British Columbia, Canada. The ponds in the stream were dug and shaped by hand at the same time she was building her home in 2010. The soil that was removed from digging the ponds was spread on site and not hauled away. She used aquatic safe liners to build the wetlands and the stream because the texture of soil on her property was low in clay. The upper wetland was positioned so that it would be supplied with water from a downspout when it rained. Water enters the upper pond and flows downstream into the lower pond. A submersible pump sends water through an underground pipe back up into the upper pond. Here's how the upper pond appeared in 2011 when it was only 1 year old. Here's how it looks 14 years later. I remember when Heather built the wetlands, I doubted she would see many animals using the habitats because her home was in a subdivision. I was wrong. Here are a few of the many animal species she's observed using the ponds. The Columbia spotted frog is living and breeding in the ponds. The Pacific chorus frog is breeding in the wetlands. Listen to these Pacific chorus frogs that are calling from the wetland in the spring. Overnight guests staying in Heather's home enjoy listening to the chorus frogs that are calling outside of the bedroom window. Western toads are in and near the wetlands. If you turn over some logs, you'll probably find a long-toed salamander. Here's a western terrestrial garter snake that's hunting in the wetlands. Look at the great habitat Heather created where the garter snake can hunt for food. This white-tailed deer is drinking water and eating plants in and around the wetlands. It likes the place so much it laid down in the shade outside of her picture window. There are many birds using the small wetlands. Of course, you'll see the American robin and the mourning dove. The ponds have also attracted the beautiful lazuli bunting and the varied thrush to drink. The mountain chickadee is a regular visitor. She's also watched the beautiful rufous hummingbird using the wetlands, and the Calliope hummingbird, one of the smallest birds on Earth. The tiger swallowtail, along with other butterflies and moths, are using the wetlands. Dragonflies are also fun to watch as they fly around controlling the mosquitoes. Damselflies are a common sight. As you can see, when you build a small wetland in your yard, you provide habitat for many animals. Heather did a beautiful job using rock to landscape around the wetlands she built. The spaces between and under the rocks provide places for animals to hide. I'd like you to know that it's not a requirement to place rocks around a wetland that you build. I mainly use rocks to control erosion where water enters and leaves a wetland. Heather observes that water will evaporate from the ponds and the stream in the semi-arid climate where she lives. The plants also use water. She adds water once or twice a week during the summer. She increases this to 3 to 4 times a week during heat waves when temperatures range from 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. The neighbors think the ponds and the stream look nice. Many have commented on how they love to hear the chorus frogs in the evenings. The neighbors' children have brought their friends over to look at the tadpoles. Most children don't get to see frogs or toads in their neighborhoods. Heather offers this advice for people who are thinking about building a wetland in their yard. She recommends using local native wetland plants as they will tolerate the weather and the temperature extremes. She transplanted the plants in her ponds and stream from a local lake. They survive when the pond freezes in the winter. Heather recommends cutting or pulling dead foliage and thinning excess plants in the early spring before the growth starts and the frogs are breeding. She's careful not to disturb the water and the plants after the frogs and toads lay their eggs in the spring. She doesn't operate the submersible pump during the frog breeding season because that appears to reduce the number of tadpoles. There's no requirement to install a pump or an aerator if you're building a wetland and a stream. She leaves most of the algae in the ponds to provide habitat for invertebrates and frogs. During hot weather, when the algae becomes too thick, she pulls it out carefully and checks for tadpoles, larvae, and invertebrates and places these back in the water. Heather recommends that in early years when the pond is new, to let the algae, the leaves, and the vegetation settle and decompose in the bottom of the pond to create an organic layer. This organic layer is important to plants and invertebrates. Heather has worked hard to build and to maintain these attractive and functional wetlands and a stream. Her yard has become an oasis for animals and plants. The wetland you build in your backyard doesn't have to be large. This small vernal pond near Tampico, Indiana, is providing breeding habitat for the western chorus frog. We found the puddle in an old farm field that was created years ago when a wetland was drained. The wetland you build doesn't have to be deep. The water in this shallow wetland warms quickly in the spring. Warm water is important for frog eggs to hatch and larvae to grow and then to emerge before the vernal pond dries. This shallow vernal pond was created by tractors driving over a low spot with clay texture soil in Kentucky. These young men found fairy shrimp breeding in the vernal pond during the cold month of January. Let's visit Saguaro National Park near Tucson, Arizona. You'd be amazed by seeing so many saguaro cactus found nowhere else on Earth. Like most tourists, you'll probably stop at the visitor center. After looking at the displays and watching the movie, you'll probably look outside and see a watering trough. When my wife and I were visiting, we watched a deer drinking from the trough. I asked the volunteers at the front desk about the watering trough. They said it was built years ago when the visitor center was constructed. I found out that due to the cracks in the concrete and a leaking supply line, they must use a garden hose to fill the trough several times a day. The watering trough looks artificial with its donut-shaped rim. I'd be willing to volunteer to replace the trough with a naturally occurring wetland that also provides habitat for the rare Chiricahua leopard frog in the desert. Here are the basics of building a wetland in your backyard. Identify an area of level ground that changes no more than 6 inches in elevation from upper to lower edge. Here's an excellent place to build a small wetland that would be supplied with water from a downspout. This ground has too steep of a slope for building a small wetland. Mark the perimeter of the wetland you would like to build so it's no more than 10 feet in diameter. Make sure there are no buried utilities before you dig. Use a shovel to dig a test hole in the middle to see if an aquatic safe liner is needed. Place the soil removed from building the wetland so it won't flood your home or your neighbor's property. Use a laser and a grade rod to help build the wetland. Ask friends and family to help you dig a wetland that's about 1 foot deep in the middle that has gradual slopes. Rhea and her family built this vernal pond soon after she graduated from high school. Rhea first contacted me and asked how she could build a wetland at her high school that would be used by the western spadefoots for breeding. Unfortunately, the principal at the school wouldn't consider approving the project for another 5 years. Undaunted, Rhea's family agreed they should build a wetland in their backyard. Rhea lives in San Diego, California, where it's hot and dry. Homes are located on the ridges, with some valleys being undeveloped. They examined their backyard to find a level area for building a wetland. The best site was an existing garden that was sunny, about 4 feet from the side of their home. They used bricks to mark the perimeter of the possible wetland, leaving room to walk around the vernal pond after it was built. The next step involved using a shovel to dig a test hole in the center of the marked area. They found the soil was high in sand and low in clay. An aquatic safe liner would be needed to make a wetland that would hold water. Using a tape measure, they determined a wetland could be built 9 feet in diameter and 12 inches deep. A wire flag was used to mark the center of the wetland to be built. They worked to relocate the garden. Digging in the compacted ground wasn't easy. This is something most people don't do every day. While digging the basin, they uncovered irrigation pipes that were no longer working. They exposed and removed these old irrigation pipes. And there were roots from trees and shrubs that had to be removed. Some of the roots they removed were large, like this one. They were surprised to find a drain pipe while digging the hole. The drain pipe was removed because it didn't appear to be connected to another pipe. Rhea asked relatives to help dig the basin for the vernal pond. It took a couple of days and a lot of hard work to build the vernal pond. It was necessary to loosen the compacted soil so it could be removed using a shovel. The basin for the wetland was dug deepest in the middle with gradual slopes. Here's one of the large rocks that had to be removed when digging the wetland basin. A small laser was used to measure elevations while digging the basin. The laser had a green-colored beam that was easiest to see indoors, not outdoors in the sun. In an ingenious move, they used the laser at night when the green beam was most visible to measure elevations. I find it easier to use a long-range laser with a red beam and a laser receiver that's designed for use outdoors. Rhea also measured the depth of the wetland basin as it was being dug by placing a long and a straight board across the hole. A construction level was set on the board to make sure it was level from end to end. A tape measure was used to measure between the top of the board and the bottom of the hole. The hole was dug to be deepest in the middle. The depth of the hole in the center and the slope were checked from time to time using boards, landscape spikes, and the construction level. They made their own grade rod from a section of irrigation pipe that had been saved. You can see the green light from the laser on the surface of the grade rod. Here the grade rod and the green laser are being used to measure the depth and the percent slope of the wetland being dug. Using the laser ensures that the wetland you're building will be the depth that you've planned and that you use all of the liner, producing the maximum surface area of water in the new wetland. After much digging and frequent measuring, they remove rocks and sharp objects from the basin by hand. They're now ready to place the geotextile and the liner. The landscape spikes that they used for measuring are removed before the first layer of geotextile is placed in the wetland. Rhea ordered a 10-foot by 20-foot piece of 6-ounce underguard non-woven geotextile underlayment from Amazon to place under and over the liner before it was covered with soil. She also ordered a one-piece 10-foot by 10-foot Firestone Pond Guard EPDM 45mm fish-safe liner from Amazon. Be careful not to purchase a liner that is not labeled Firestone Pond Guard, as most other liners contain chemicals that will poison aquatic life. She purchased 12-inch galvanized landscape spikes from Amazon. I've also used the same landscape spikes and find that they bend easily. These spikes are half as strong as those purchased from Lowe's or the Home Depot. I don't recommend ordering spikes from Amazon if your soil has rock in it, as they will bend. They now place a 6-ounce geotextile blanket in the basin. The landscape spikes are used as a guide for positioning the fabric. Next, they place a 45mm Firestone Pond Guard aquatic safe liner on top of the geotextile, and they use bricks as a guide. The wrinkles are pulled out much like making a bed. Now the second layer of geotextile is placed over the liner to protect it from puncture. They use the grade rod that they made and the laser to mark the top edge of the liner and the geotextile where it should be anchored with landscape spikes. The top layer of geotextile is marked where the landscape spikes should be driven into the ground. A hammer is used to drive the landscape spikes into the ground. Some of the landscape spikes are so weak that they bend before they can be driven into the ground. The bent spikes need to be removed so people and animals don't step on them. The liner and geotextile material that's outside of landscape spikes is now trimmed before it's completely covered with soil. Scissors are used to trim and remove the excess liner and geotextile. The soil removed from digging the basin is now spread over the liner and geotextile. Rhea uses a shovel to cover the geotextile and the liner with 6 inches of soil. She places a thinner layer of soil along the top edge of the liner, and this is done to reduce water losses by wicking. Wicking is what happens when you see water moving up a paper towel that's placed in a glass of water. The end of the shovel is marked at 6 inches so it can be used to measure the thickness of soil being placed over the liner and geotextile. Covering the liner is a team effort. A native species of spike rush, Eleochris montevadinus, is planted in the new vernal pond. The spike rush can be expected to grow in shallower water and along the edge of the vernal pond where the soil is moist. A garden hose is used to water the spike rush. This looks like one of those welcome rains in Southern California. The end of the garden hose is placed in the bottom of the vernal pond. The handle on the faucet is turned slowly so there won't be a rush of water that washes soil off the liner. The bricks are repurposed to form an attractive border around the vernal pond. Notice the groove in the mud? It was left by a possum visiting the vernal pond. Raccoons soon find the vernal pond. A desert cottontail takes a drink. Desert cottontails make great use of the water in the vernal pond. Dragonfly larvae appeared in the vernal pond. These will control the mosquito larvae. Damselflies rested on the spike rush and laid their eggs in the water. Their chickens found plenty to eat around the vernal pond. The spike rush produced seeds and spread rapidly. Soon the spike rush took over. It had to be thinned to maintain open water. They'll add water from the garden hose from time to time to maintain water in the vernal pond. Rhea is amazed at the diversity of animals using the vernal pond. She's away at college now and takes care of the vernal pond when she comes home. Dan Menken contacted me in February 2021 with an interest in building a vernal pond in his backyard. He lives in Woodbury, Minnesota. You can see from this photo of his front yard that he's very serious about establishing native plants. Dan decided to build the wetland in a level location in his backyard along the edge of the trees. Their children used to play in the puddles that formed in their backyard after a heavy rain. Here's the vernal pond he started to dig in April. He asked his wife Fiona to stand in the hole so he could confirm its size. She was a bit suspicious but agreed. I like how Dan is using the soil from digging the vernal pond to build a raised walkway around the lower edge of the vernal pond. Heavy rains filled the partially dug vernal pond during construction. It would take 5 or more days for the water to soak into the ground after a heavy rain. Dan had to wait until July for the soil to dry enough to install the liner. The liner he purchased was 10 by 10 feet in size. Dan used a long pipe and a yardstick to measure depth. He dug the hole 18 inches deep, which allowed an extra 6 inches for covering the liner with soil. I don't recommend building a wetland without using a laser level. The laser will help you obtain the planned depth and make sure you're not wasting half of the liner that could have been used to build a much larger pond. He placed a layer of geotextile over the soil in the basin. He now placed an EPDM aquatic safe liner on top of the geotextile. Another layer of geotextile was placed over the liner, with rocks being used to hold the fabric in place. After adding some soil, he started trimming the liner and geotextile. It started raining as he finished sloping the edges of the vernal pond. He finished installation and planted a few irises. The rain added 3 inches of water to the pond. The wetland is a beautiful addition to their yard. Dan has established an attractive diversity of flowering plants around the wetland. The stone path offers a functional and an attractive way to walk around the wetland. The wetland will probably contain water year-round. He's seen 8 wild turkeys using the vernal pond. I was excited to learn that the northern leopard frogs are using the new wetland. Lana Greenewald built this vernal pond at her home outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania by using hand tools. The yellow flags mark where she designed the small wetland. The white plastic pipe is the water outlet from the gutters on her home. Lana wanted to build the vernal pond away from the neighbors and near woodland so it would be more likely to be used by amphibians. She marked the perimeter of the planned vernal pond with yellow wire flags and orange spray paint. She used the ribbon test to determine that the texture of soil on the site was high in clay. However, she decided to use an aquatic safe liner to build the wetland because there were also nails and bits of trash in the test hole. This showed her that the backyard contains construction fill, which could have been difficult to shape and compact so it would hold water without using a liner. She dug the hole deepest in the center and used a tape measure to make sure it was 18 inches deep. This would allow 6 inches of soil to be placed over the installed liner with a maximum water depth of 12 inches. Lana did not have a laser level to use for the construction of this wetland. I found it almost impossible to build a wetland that requires the use of a liner without using a laser level. Think of installing a liner like you're trying to bury a large bowl in the ground. Because all ground surfaces are sloped, the laser allows you to install and then to trim the rim or the edge of the liner so it's not tipped. The soil removed from digging the hole is placed on a tarp. About 1/2 of the soil will be needed to cover the liner once it's installed. The next step is to use a shovel to slope the sides of the hole to form a basin that's large enough to use all of the liner that was purchased. The hole is starting to look like a wetland basin. However, the sides are steep and the slopes don't yet reach the edge of the designed wetland as it was marked on the ground with paint. The black fabric has been placed over the liner in the wetland basin. The blue-colored tarp has been temporarily placed over the soil that was removed from digging the wetland to help keep it dry. Some of the soil has been used to build a dam along the lower edge of the hole that's being dug. Had I been there helping with this project, we would have started construction by setting a stake in the center of the wetland to be built, and then using a 100-foot-long cloth tape measure to mark the perimeter of the wetland we planned to build. I would have also suggested using a laser level to identify the low edge of the marked perimeter, which would be the same elevation as the top edge of the liner where it would be trimmed, and this would also be the same elevation of water in the new wetland. While digging, we would have used the tape measure and the gray rod to check elevations and distances to excavate the basin so it would match the size of the liner that was purchased for the project. The liner and geotextile are being covered with soil to protect them from being damaged by sunlight and by deer hooves. The vernal pond could have been made larger if a dam had not been built and if the liner and geotextile were not placed over the dam. I recommend trimming the liner and geotextile so the upper edge is at the same elevation, which is equal to the low edge of the marked perimeter of the wetland that's being built. Lana's done an excellent job covering the liner and the geotextile with a thick layer of soil that plants can grow in and that will also protect the liner from being punctured. Here's the vernal pond as it's filling with water. The dam and ridge of soil surrounding the wetland is diverting runoff away from the wetland basin. However, this can be a good thing if you want to make sure the vernal pond will dry in the summer. The exposed soil has been seeded and mulched with straw so it won't erode. The vernal pond is now filled with water. The new wetland blends in well with its surroundings. The wetland and landscaping with rock have created quality habitat for amphibians and reptiles. The wetland looks great. The string fence will help keep deer from eating the native plants that are growing in and around the new wetland. I think you'll agree that Jake Kubel has no equal when it comes to building the most natural-looking wetland possible using hand tools. Jake dug his first wetland by hand only 200 feet away from his parents' home near Rockport, Maine. Each spring he finds from 40 to 50 spotted salamander egg masses and thousands of wood frog tadpoles using this wetland. Wanting to do more, he decided to build a larger wetland in the wooded area next to his parents' home. The finished wetland would measure 25 feet wide by 35 feet long and contain water 3 feet deep. He began digging the wetland in very stony terrain beneath a forest canopy with many tree roots. He piled branches, logs, and organic material along one side of the wetland he was building to later spread in the bottom of the finished wetland basin. This photo shows how thick the black-colored organic layer is near the surface, with the gray-colored mineral soil beneath. Look at how much soil he has moved by the second day of construction. Here's how the basin appeared at the end of the third day of construction. He's digging the wetland basin deepest in the middle, placing mineral soil on the left side, and saving organic material on the right side. Look at the size and the number of rocks that he's dug out of the ground. Jake is saving these to place back in the wetland after he's finished digging. He left a couple of the largest boulders in place to serve as natural habitat features. Heavy rain fell that raised the elevation of groundwater and almost filled the wetland under construction. The rain helped show that the finished wetland would be supplied with both groundwater and surface water. The remainder of the week, he was able to continue removing the topsoil and tree roots near the surface of the ground. He had to return in August to finish excavation when the water table was low. The project was quite a challenge, taking him 10 long days of hard work to complete using a spade, pickaxe, loppers, and a wheelbarrow. The wetland is likely to dry in the summer because a groundwater dam was not built that would block the tree roots from removing water from the basin. Having saved much of the organic soil horizon to one side, he used this organic material to coat the bottom of the wetland that he had dug. He then spread leaf litter and coarse woody debris from the surrounding woods over the organic layer in the basin. Jake built stone piles and jetties using the excavated stones that would provide salamander larvae with refugia and hunting grounds. The leaves falling in October did a good job blanketing the exposed berms that were created downslope of the excavated material. Here's the wetland half full of water. It looked like construction occurred years ago. Notice the large spruce tree that fell over in the background. The snow-covered wetland is beautiful. I congratulate Jake on working harder than anyone I know of to build a wetland. This wetland was dug by hand over 2,000 years ago. You can see this wetland and 113 others like it by visiting the Fort Ancient Earthworks and Nature Preserve near Oregonia, Ohio. Indigenous people used the tools they made from mussel shells and from deer bone to excavate wetland basins in the ground. I can't imagine how much work it took to build a wetland using tools like these. They chose sites to build ponds and ridgetops where the soil texture was high in clay. They first dug basins and then placed layers of clay and compacted each layer of clay in the bottom so the ponds would hold water. They built these vernal ponds without constructing dams or using water control structures, pumps, pipes, or wells, all that require maintenance. Who says you can't use hand tools to build a natural-looking and functioning wetland that will last forever? A small wetland that you build in your yard can be of great value to wildlife. I encourage you to follow the steps that I've described in this video and other videos to design and build a wetland in your yard using hand tools. Well, please let me know if you like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you.